The Devil's Brigade is a war film from 1968 that set out to dramatize the creation and exploits of one of the most unusual military units of the Second World War, the 1st Special Service Force, a combined team made up of Canadian and American soldiers trained for unconventional warfare. Directed by Andrew V. McLaglen, the film belongs to a cycle of mid-century war movies that tried to balance patriotic drama with human interest stories and ensemble casts. It is a film that often gets compared to The Dirty Dozen, which was released just a year earlier and which also dealt with a group of rough and ready men being shaped into a fighting force. The Devil's Brigade, however, focuses on a true story and positions itself as a more straightforward, though still dramatized, retelling of how the Allied forces experimented with elite commandos who would go on to lay the foundation for what we now think of as modern special forces. The film begins with the introduction of Robert Frederick, a young American officer played by William Holden, who is tasked with forming this combined brigade. The Americans have their own way of doing things, while the Canadians, led by the tough but respected Colonel Crow played by Cliff Robertson, bring their own standards and discipline. Much of the film's early energy is devoted to the cultural and personal clash between these two groups of men. The Americans are shown as brawlers, misfits, and men who might not easily fit into traditional units, while the Canadians are depicted as disciplined, highly trained, and at times dismissive of their American counterparts. This dynamic drives the first half of the story and sets the stage for the eventual bonding of the group. As is often the case in war films of this era, the narrative tension lies in whether this unlikely band of men can set aside their differences and transform into a lethal, united force. What works well in this setup is the film's ability to give the viewer a sense of the training, the physical and mental strain, and the enormous challenges of creating a new kind of soldier. The Devil's Brigade is very much a training film in its opening acts. We see the men run obstacle courses, practice close combat, and learn how to operate as a small, flexible team rather than as part of a large conventional army. The process of turning individualistic brawlers into commandos is dramatized with a mixture of humor, toughness, and gradual respect building between the groups. McLaglen, who was a director known for his steady and classical approach to Hollywood storytelling, takes his time in these sequences, showing us not just the sweat and struggle of the soldiers but also their gradual realization that they are being asked to become something entirely new in the context of the war. William Holden gives one of the more understated performances of his later career in this film. His Colonel Frederick is not a flamboyant or theatrical character but a serious, driven officer with a vision for what this unit can become. Holden carries with him a certain gravity, the sense of a man who knows the stakes and who is trying to hold together a fragile experiment in the face of skepticism from both sides. Cliff Robertson provides a sharp counterpoint as Crow, embodying discipline, confidence, and a sense of Canadian pride. Together, the two characters form the leadership core that has to manage egos, national differences, and the chaos of molding a disparate group into a single fighting unit. Around them, the supporting cast is filled with recognizable faces from 1960s Hollywood, including Richard Yeckle and Vince Edwards, all of whom contribute to the rugged ensemble tone. One of the striking features of The Devil's Brigade is how much it relies on the trope of the clash between cultures. The Canadians are portrayed as neat, regimented, and professional, while the Americans are depicted as brash, rowdy, and more likely to start a bar fight than salute an officer. This is exaggerated for dramatic and comedic effect, but it also provides the central arc of the film, the need for unity. The idea is that war does not leave room for petty national stereotypes, and when the brigade finally learns to work as one, their effectiveness is undeniable. It is a familiar formula in war films, but it is delivered here with enough sincerity and historical grounding that it avoids becoming too cartoonish. The pacing of the film is worth considering. The first half leans heavily on training sequences and character building, with a lighter tone that sometimes borders on comedy. The Americans and Canadians fight each other, prank one another, and create plenty of opportunities for the script to play with national pride and rivalry. However, once the unit is sent into combat in Italy, the tone shifts dramatically. The second half of the film becomes a much more serious and violent war story. This structural division between light-hearted training antics and grim battlefield action mirrors a common approach in 1960s war cinema. The Dirty Dozen, for example, used a similar format, moving from comic training scenes to a bloody climactic mission. The Devil's Brigade follows this pattern, though its second half is somewhat less stylized and more grounded in depicting historical events. The combat sequences in the film are staged with a mixture of grit and Hollywood spectacle. The brigade is sent to fight in the mountains of Italy, where their unique training gives them an advantage in scaling terrain and surprising enemy positions. The film highlights their daring night raids, their ability to infiltrate seemingly impregnable defenses, and their sheer determination in the face of German forces. The action scenes are competently directed, with large-scale battles, explosions, and close-quarters combat, though they may lack some of the visceral punch that later war films would deliver in the 1970s and beyond. Still, for its time, The Devil's Brigade provides a respectable level of intensity and a clear sense of geography in the battles, allowing viewers to follow the action without confusion. One of the central themes of the film is transformation. These men, who began as strangers divided by national differences and personality clashes, become a cohesive unit defined by trust, respect, and shared hardship. By the time they are in combat, the viewer believes in their effectiveness as a team. The film underscores this by showing the brigade accomplishing feats that would have been impossible for a conventional unit. The message is clear: cooperation across borders, combined with determination and innovative thinking, can achieve extraordinary results. This was not just a wartime message but also a reflection of the broader 1960s cultural landscape, where ideas of unity and cooperation carried political and social weight. From a cinematic perspective, The Devil's Brigade is a product of its era. The widescreen color cinematography takes advantage of location shooting in Utah, California, and Italy, giving the film a mixture of authentic European scenery and the rugged landscapes of the American West. The film often has the look of a Western, with mountains and desert-like terrain serving as the backdrop for military action. This was no accident, as McLaglen was known for his work in Westerns, and he brought that visual sensibility to this war story. The score, composed by Alex North, provides a rousing and sometimes sentimental accompaniment, heightening the emotional beats and reinforcing the sense of military heroism. In terms of its place in the war film canon, The Devil's Brigade occupies an interesting space. It is not as celebrated as The Dirty Dozen or as artistically ambitious as films like The Bridge on the River Kwai. Instead, it sits in the middle ground of late 1960s war cinema, entertaining, competently made, respectful of its subject matter, but not groundbreaking. Its historical basis gives it a certain weight, and it has been appreciated by those interested in the origins of modern special forces. At the same time, its adherence to formula and its somewhat dated portrayal of soldiers as broad types rather than deeply developed individuals limit its impact when viewed today. However, the film does succeed in highlighting a little-known aspect of World War II history. The first Special Service Force, nicknamed the Black Devils by their German opponents, was a real unit that carried out daring raids and earned a formidable reputation. The film pays tribute to their bravery and their contribution to the war effort, even if it does so with some Hollywood embellishment. For audiences in 1968, the story would have been both inspiring and novel, introducing them to a chapter of the war that had not been widely represented on screen. For modern viewers, it remains a useful entry point into learning about this unique Allied force. The Devil's Brigade also reflects the filmmaking style of its director. Andrew V. McLaglen was often described as a craftsman rather than an auteur. His work was solid, professional, and reliable, but rarely flashy or innovative. In this film, his straightforward direction allows the story to be told clearly and without unnecessary distractions. The emphasis is on the men, their struggles, and their triumphs, rather than on experimental techniques or complex narrative structures. This makes the film accessible and easy to follow, though perhaps less memorable in the long run compared to more daring works of the same period. Looking at the performances again, it is worth emphasizing how much William Holden anchors the film. By 1968, Holden was already a major star with a long career behind him, including an Academy Award. His presence lent credibility and gravitas to the project, helping to elevate what might otherwise have been a more routine war picture. Cliff Robertson, who would go on to win an Oscar for Charlie the same year, also brings a commanding presence, and their scenes together give the film its backbone. The supporting cast, while not always given deep characterization, is effective in filling out the ranks and providing the necessary variety of personalities that ensemble war films thrive on. Critically, The Devil's Brigade received mixed reviews upon release. Some praised its respectful treatment of history and its stirring action, while others felt it was too derivative of The Dirty Dozen and too reliant on formula. Box office performance was modest, and the film did not become a runaway hit. Over time, however, it has developed a certain cult following among war film enthusiasts and military history buffs, who appreciate its focus on a real-life unit and its straightforward storytelling. The film has also found a place in discussions about the evolution of special forces, as the first Special Service Force was indeed a precursor to elite units such as the Green Berets and Canada's Joint Task Force 2. When viewed today, The Devil's Brigade can be seen as both a product of its time and a tribute to an overlooked chapter of World War II. Its mixture of humor, training sequences, and battle action may feel familiar, but its sincerity keeps it engaging. The film does not attempt to deconstruct war or explore its moral complexities in the way later films like Apocalypse Now or Platoon would. Instead, it remains firmly in the tradition of classic war adventure stories, where camaraderie, courage, and sacrifice are the central values. In that sense, it reflects the transitional period of the late 1960s, when Hollywood was beginning to experiment with more cynical and complex views of war, but still produced films that adhered to older traditions of heroism and unity. Ultimately, The Devil's Brigade is a solid war film that achieves what it sets out to do without overreaching. It entertains, informs, and pays tribute, even if it does not revolutionize the genre. Its strengths lie in its ensemble cast, its balance of humor and seriousness, and its clear depiction of how a group of mismatched men became one of the most feared units of the war. For viewers interested in World War II history, particularly the role of special forces, it remains a worthwhile watch. For general audiences, it offers a glimpse into the kind of war storytelling that dominated the late 1960s. A time when Hollywood was both looking back at the recent past and moving toward a new cinematic future. At just over 2 hours in length, the film provides a complete narrative arc from conception to combat, leaving the viewer with a sense of closure and respect for the men it depicts. It may not reach the emotional heights of the greatest war films, but it fulfills its mission with competence and sincerity. The Devil's Brigade stands as a reminder that not all cinematic tributes to war heroes need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes it is enough to tell the story clearly, honor the men who lived it, and provide an audience with both entertainment and a touch of history.